Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to NFL Fantasy Live. I'm Marcus Grant alongside Cynthia Freeland, Kimmy Checks, and Adam Rank. And we are a quarter of the way through the season, so maybe it's time to take a little stock right now. Are there any leagues where maybe you haven't thrown in the towel, but maybe they are a lower priority for you than they were at the start of the season? Cynthia?
Absolutely not. I'm not giving up on any of them. I think that the week 4 is when you really start to shine, even if you're 0-4.
Does that face mean that you're 0-4, Cynthia? I'm not giving up on any leagues. The one that I'm most prioritizing is our Fantasy Live League, because Adam Rank said last year when Colleen Wolfe was new to the show, she won. So now I feel like it's my duty to win. It's rookie's choice. So I'm in for it.
Well, I think fantasy leagues are a lot like your children. You definitely have some favorites, and you're always going to have some that you pay more attention to. So that's the way that I approach my fantasy leagues.
Well, I have a guillotine/eliminator league where I was the lowest scorer this week. So it's not so much that I gave up on that league. It's that the league pretty much gave up on me. So at least I have one less thing that I have to worry about setting a lineup for each and every week. Speaking of setting a lineup, that brings us to waiver wire wonder time. Which fantasy free agents will be a thing come tomorrow in your league, Cynthia?
Well, if you haven't heard of T. Higgins yet, then you probably didn't watch college football, and you probably didn't watch the Bengals game last week. You really want to take a look to see. I know it's not a great opportunity against Baltimore this Sunday, but they're going to need to throw the ball, and you can stash him and play him in later weeks. And we know Joe Burrow, he likes to slang the rock.
T. Higgins has definitely pushed A.J. Green to the background. Meanwhile, Joshua Kelly is stepping to the foreground for the Los Angeles Chargers. I was surprised to see that he's available in almost 70% of NFL.com leagues. I would have thought that number would have been much lower after the way he performed in the first week of the season. But already he had been playing 40% of the snaps, averaging about 15 touches per game. That number should go up with Austin Eckler on the shelf for the next several weeks. So if somebody in your league has Austin Eckler and is looking for some help, I think you go get Joshua Kelly. You think about trading him or maybe just playing him yourself?
Well, I believe that a lot of people picked him up the week that they were playing the Carolina Panthers, and he didn't quite perform. So he might already be gone. And if that's the case, then I would look at Justin Jackson. I think that we've seen him over the last couple of years, and when he's been given an opportunity, he's looked pretty good. And on Sunday, he got 8 touches in that game after Austin Eckler went out. And one of the things that really concerns me about Joshua Kelly is that he's putting the rock on the ground. So don't break the bank putting all your fab budget on Joshua Kelly or anything like that. And if you end up not getting him, don't fret if you end up with Justin Jackson.
Another guy that I think is going to be a huge addition this week on the waiver wire is Ernest Johnson. Now, with the Browns star running back Nick Chubb going on the injured reserve list this week, Kareem Hunt is going to need help in that run game, which is where Ernest Johnson comes into the picture. And he's probably one of the most available free agents, only being rostered in 1% of NFL.com league. Now, against that bad Cowboys defense, he rushed for the most yards on the team with 13 attempts for 95 yards. And though he did play less snaps than Kareem Hunt, Johnson looks like the other side of that run game as the Browns look to continue to try to win against the Colts, the Steelers, the Bengals, and the Raiders.
Browns definitely want to run the football, so there could be some opportunities for Johnson there. All right, let's go around the horn and talk about your top 3 waiver wire priorities. Rank them in order. Adam Rank, we'll start with you.
Well, I already have Joshua Kelly and T. Higgins on a couple of my teams, so I'm going to look at Justin Jackson. I'm going to look at Scotty Miller, who's had at least 79 receiving yards in 3 of his 4 games. And also, I got a quarterback, Teddy Bridgewater, but I'm going to hit him up later on in the show.
All right, I love that. I'm going to talk about all the guys that we've been talking about because I listen to you guys and I listen to your advice as well. My number 1 priority is going to be trying to grab Josh Kelly. After that, again, the guy I just talked about, Ernest Johnson. And then third on that list is that wide receiver who's shining is T. Higgins.
All right, well, I'm going to make sure that it's a clean sweep in terms of Chargers running back, so I'm going again with Joshua Kelly as my number 1. My number 2 is actually Laviska Shenault. You want to take a look at him, especially this weekend. Do you know how many yards per play the Texans give up? All of them is the answer. And last but not least, RIP Alliance of American Football, Ernest Johnson. Welcome to the National Football League. I think he's a great add this week and going forward. I love anyone who gets yards above the expected rush, and he had a bunch of them.
Well, Cynthia and I are thinking very similarly, but I'm going to mind meld with Kimmy Checks there. I'm going exactly the way she did. Joshua Kelly at number 1, Ernest Johnson at number 2, and T. Higgins is at number 3. All right, so now if we're adding people, that means we've got to subtract some folks. So let's see, who are we making waves with this week? Adam, start with you.
I feel bad, but I have to release Benny Snell this week. I've really wanted to see him take a more prominent role with the Steelers. As a matter of fact, I drafted him late in a lot of leagues trying to get ahead of the game, and he was good in week 1, but since that time, his production has really fallen off. He played just 18% of the snaps in weeks 2 and 3, and until we can really see a permanent role for him in the future, he's somebody that should be on your waiver wire.
So this guy is rostered in 83% of NFL.com leagues, but my pick of A.J. Green is someone who I think that you can look to get rid of. He's ranking, 92nd among wide receivers, and he's only getting an average of 1.6 yards of separation, which is the fewest in the NFL per Next Gen Stats. That is something where if he's not open, do you really think that they're going to throw the ball his way? T. Higgins has really supplanted A.J. Green. I think you can go ahead and drop him.
I'm looking at another veteran wide receiver, and that's T.Y. Hilton. So far this season, just 13 catches, 162 yards, and he's playing in the Colts offense that has one of the lower passing volumes in the NFL. They're throwing the ball less than 50% of the time. They haven't reached 250 passing yards as a team in each of the last 3 weeks. And right now, just in general, I think that Indianapolis passing game is fairly unusable. Maybe you take some shots on a guy like Zach Pascal, but other than that, there's just not anybody that's very attractive for your fantasy roster.
Well, if I want to win our NFL Fantasy Live League, it looks like I'm going to have to get rid of Tanyan Johnson. Now, if you looked at the amount of snaps Johnson has played, you would assume that he'd be getting plenty of production since he's ranking 3rd amongst those lying running backs, but that's just not the case. He's averaging 4 fantasy points per game, which is just absolutely not going to cut it as a fantasy starter. So with the Lions coming up on a bye week and me needing to make some major adjustments, Tanyan Johnson is off my list and without regret.
He feels like that third wheel there, along with Adrian Peterson and DeAndre Swift in the backfield. All right, please silence your cell phones. It's time for another showing of Overreaction Theater. Now, the things that happened on the field in Week 4 will send our fantasy heroes to an unshakable destiny. Or maybe not. Anyway, we're going to freak out about whatever happened over the past week or so. In fact, Adam Rank will start by talking about Odell Beckham Jr., who had a huge game on Sunday. That means he is going to score 30-plus fantasy points in every game for the rest of the season.
Marcus, calm down. We talked about this heading into this game against the Dallas Cowboys, that this was going to be a perfect opportunity for Odell Beckham Jr. to go out there and show everybody that he is the superstar that we know that he is. But unfortunately, this offense doesn't suit him. It's not a great match. It's like having Guy Fieri hanging out with you and you're not going to a dine-in. You know, it just doesn't make sense. So I'm sorry, Marcus. It was a great game. I loved it, but it's not going to happen every week.
What if you were going to a dive? Maybe then it would be okay. Kimmy, stop the presses. Dak Prescott is going to crush the single-season NFL passing record. He's on pace for more than 6,700 yards. The record is 5,477 by Peyton Manning in 2013.
Yeah, so I absolutely believe this, and I really do not think that this is an overstatement or an overreaction, because just last week against the Cleveland Browns, Dak Prescott had 504 passing yards. That is the most in NFL history. Now, speaking of most in the NFL and breaking records, Dak is the very first player in NFL history to have 450-plus passing yards in 3 straight games. So as his defense continues to give up all of the points, making him scramble on the offensive side of the ball, he is easily going to be able to surpass Peyton Manning.
Oh, to be attached to a high-volume passing game supported by a bad defense. Cynthia, caffeinate yourself, because Cup of Joe Mixon is a top 5 running back from here on out.
Well, what'd you say about Dak Prescott? High-volume offense supported by not-so-good defense. Same situation here. This is an offense that runs 74 plays per game. That's second most in the NFL. And Joe Mixon's getting 22.5 touches per game. That's 5th among running backs. I think he's absolutely going to finish in the top 5, especially when you think Joe Burrow is going to get nothing but better, and it's going to help Joe Mixon, and Joe Mixon's going to help Joe Burrow. The two Joes, lots of Joes. I spilled my Cup of Joe all over myself before the show. I think it all works.
That's a very hot Cup of Joe take. All right, now for me, it's Justin Herbert's going to take over the starting gig permanently and be a top 10 fantasy quarterback at the end of the year. Okay, maybe not quite so much, but he's played very well so far, averaging 310 passing yards per game in his 3 starts. 3 touchdown passes on Sunday versus a pretty good Buccaneers defense. And so maybe he's not a top 10 option, but he's a pretty good streaming option. Now all we have to do is convince Anthony Lynn that it is in our best interest as fantasy managers that Justin Herbert takes over that starting gig. All right, now that we've gone through some fantasy award winners, it's time to hand out a few fantasy Razzies on the other side of the ledger here. So Adam Rank, Jonathan Taylor, we loved him, but he's never going to break double-digit fantasy points again.
I think you're right, Marcus. That's not an overreaction. That's a little bit of an underreaction. Like, what is happening? I was watching this game and wondering, why are they running every other running back out there except for Jonathan Taylor? He's played less than 50% of the snaps in 3 of his 4 games this season. He's not involved in the passing, although nobody's involved in the passing game because Phillip Rivers is averaging just a hair over 30 passes per game. So to me, this is a situation where we did love him. Like, he should be a featured running back. He turned the corner on Roquan Smith. Phillip Rivers called it out, then give him the ball some more. So yes, I'm very worried about this one, Marcus. I think you're onto something.
I feel like this was a speech for a party of one, namely Frank Reich. All right, Kimmy, once upon a time in Hollywood, Marquise Brown was a fantasy threat, but now he seems to be living on that Rick Dalton trail right now.
You know what? I hate to say it because I was on the hype train for Hollywood Brown all this offseason, but this one actually may be true. Now, we heard that he got healthy in the offseason. We also heard that he put on 20 pounds of muscle in the offseason, and then he was ready to go. Well, not so much. He's had one big game this season, much like he did in his debut in 2019, but he's only averaging 10 fantasy points per game this year, and he's still not managed to make it into the end zone once. Now, though his routes look good, he's running 23 a game. Once upon a time in Hollywood ain't looking so hot. So no Grammys or Oscars or Emmys or any of those Hollywood awards for him this season.
Everybody needs their own Cliff Booth to keep their self-esteem up. Cynthia Kenyon Drake, he's a problem, and if you're reading this, it's too late.
I don't know if anyone preached the praises of Kenyon Drake more than me ahead of the season, but really the 3.5 fantasy points versus Detroit, woof, that's terrible. Fewer than 100 scrimmage yards in every game this season. That is not where we drafted him. Those were not the expectations. Sometimes you just got to know yourself, and I did not get this one right so far.
If there was anybody hyping Kenyon Drake more than you, it was probably me. So I understand. I completely commiserate. For me, DJ Moore, he has been less, and he won't top 75 receiving yards in a game for the rest of the year. Here's the good news about DJ Moore. You compare it to last year at this time, he's got a larger target share, and it seems to be running some more downfield routes. What's different? Well, the catch rate is down. The yards after catch are down significantly. What could get worse? Well, it looks like Robbie Anderson has taken over the role that DJ Moore had in this passing game in 2019. And you worry about that target share dropping even more when Christian McCaffrey returns. It may not be the season you were hoping for at DJ Moore. That offense just looks very different, and he doesn't look to be the focal point of that passing game anymore. All right. If you enjoy our dramatic performances here, be sure to see more of it on the NFL Fantasy Football Show. It streams on Mondays and Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern and on Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can catch it at NFL.com, in the NFL Fantasy app, and on YouTube at youtube.com/NFL Fantasy Football. We had a pair of Monday night games from which to pick prime time and off-peak performances. We'll start with those who lit it up under the lights. Give me checks.
All right, later on in the show, I'm going to talk about my 5 tight ends to trust who are not named George Kittle or Travis Kelce. And it seems like I need to add Robert Tanyan to that list. What a Monday night for that tight end. He finished the night with 6 targets and 6 receptions with 3 different touchdowns. But the best part of all of this is that this isn't just a one-game fluke. Tanyan has had at least 1 touchdown in the last 3 games and looks to be a hot ad at the tight end position if you're struggling.
Big Bob is balling, no doubt. I got Todd Gurley, who, here's the good news. He had a couple of touchdowns on Monday night. Yay! And then the rest of it, though, 63 total yards on 17 touches. I'm going to be a little bit of Buzz Killington here. Right now, Todd Gurley is still very touchdown dependent, and the worst part is he's not a part of the Atlanta passing game. Just 8 targets in 4 games. But if there is a silver lining, it's that the Falcons face the Carolina Panthers and their poor run defense next week. So Gurley might still be worth a flex spot or maybe an RB2 start for you.
All right, well, my wide receiver 1 is Ty Hill. I love his performance on Monday because this is kind of what you expect because, he's one of just 2 players to have a touchdown in every game this season, him and Mike Evans. He has 15 fantasy points or more in every game this season. One of just 2 wide receivers to do that. The Amari Cooper is the other one. 6 targets, 4 receptions, and of course the touchdown. He has those long runs down. Best catch and run receiver in the game.
All right, let's talk about Aaron Rodgers. Now, the thing that made Ric Flair such an effective heel is that not only did he boast about how great he was, he went out and backed it up. And that's pretty much what Rodgers does. He can sit there and talk about, like, a down year for me, it's a career, like, which is fine, but he's absolutely right. And he's also a little bit of a rule breaker because I think that stupid hard count is unsportsmanlike. But that's another story for another day. So congratulations to everybody who has Aaron Rodgers. You can keep on going out and popping off, realize that you have as many Super Bowl rings as Nick Foles. But whatever, for fantasy football, it's been a revelation this year.
The weirdest enduring storyline of 2020 is Adam Rank saying nice things about Aaron Rodgers. I will start with the off-peak performances from Monday night, and we'll start with the QB 17 this week. It was Patrick Mahomes. Okay, yes, he was the QB 17 this week. But let's put this into some context, right? Just 2.1 points separated him from being QB 10, who was Matt Stafford. So it wasn't like he just completely fell apart this week. Credit to the Patriots defense for stifling this Chief offense for about 3 quarters. But overall, Mahomes is the QB4. He's got a safe floor every week. 20 points has been his worst game. And next week, he's got the Raiders in 4 career meetings with the Raiders. He's averaged just under 300 passing yards per game, 11 touchdowns, 1 interception. This is no reason to be worried about him.
So I'm not worried about Matt Ryan. I went to college with him. I saw him throw that block. I love it. I remember that Virginia Tech game. If anyone else knows what I'm talking about, they'll love it too. But he didn't have a great game against Green Bay on Monday. He broke his passing touchdown streak. He had no passing touchdowns. It was a season low, only 12.4 fantasy points. That ranked number 23, 285 passing yards. This is a defense that gives up a bunch of yards and a bunch of touchdowns. Unfortunately, it just didn't happen for Ryan on Monday.
Well, those are your primetime players from Monday. Speaking of primetime, it's Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus Nick Foles and the Chicago Bears. It's Thursday Night Football on Fox, NFL Network, and streaming on Prime Video. All right, it is time for Sweat or No Sweat. We're looking at some players who have it rough on paper in Week 5. Fortunately, fantasy matchups aren't played on paper. They're played on computers. But we're going to talk about these players and let you know if you should be sweating them or not this week. So, Kimmy, first up, it is the aforementioned Tom Brady. He's taking on those Chicago Bears, who are giving up the second fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. In fact, just about 11.5, a little more than 11.5 fantasy points per game. So, sweat or no sweat for TB12?
You know, I'm sweating it for this week and this matchup. Now, last week, I understand Tom Brady, he went and threw 5 passing touchdowns to 5 different receivers. But all season long, I've been saying you want to look at the matchup and make sure that you're not starting Tom Brady against these tough matchups. And this is exactly what the situation is with the Chicago Bears. Not only that, but Tom Brady has thrown at least 1 interception in the last 3 out of 4 games. And the Bears, like you just said, Marcus, they're really, really tough against the quarterbacks. Adam Ring Chicago Bears have only allowed 3 passing touchdowns to quarterbacks all season long, which is tied for the fewest in the NFL. So though Tom Brady was great last week, don't just look at that performance and want to start him up. I do not think this is a week to start TB12.
Will also be key to check on the health of his pass catchers there. All right, Rank, you heard Cynthia talking about Matt Ryan. He's facing the Carolina Panthers, who are giving up the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. So sweat or no sweat?
Yeah, but they just gave up a huge, I'm going to say no sweat, sorry. You can pop that graphic. I pulled back the curtain a little bit. Sorry about that. But Kyler Murray was pretty good against them last week. And really it comes down to the opportunity to go out there and have to throw the football, which I think he's going to have to do this week. That is one of the things that we look for when we look at quarterbacks. We talked about it when talking about Joey Burrow. Like, who's a good quarterback on a team that has a bad defense who's going to be forced to throw the ball a lot? Guys like Dak Prescott, Joey Burrow, and I think Matt Ryan is certainly in that category, and he ran into a tough matchup, as much as I hate to say this. But, like, the Packers' defense is actually good, so don't worry about last night. Just move forward and start Matt Ryan this week.
Volume for Matt Ryan in the Falcons passing game. Okay, Cynthia, how about Miles Sanders at the Steelers, giving up the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game to the running backs? Sweat or no sweat in this Keystone State matchup?
Please pop the graphic that says no sweat on this one. And this is not because I think that the Pittsburgh defense is going to be particularly generous to the Eagles in general. It's because he's at 100-plus scrimmage yards in 2 of 3 games, 15 or more touches in every single game. Yes, I said Pittsburgh allowing the second fewest fantasy points per game to running backs this season. But remember, the Eagles do tricky things, like they go for it on 4th down. They go for 2 in situations early in games. All of those analytics say there's more increased opportunities for more drives, more volume to Miles Sanders, and he actually is in my top 10 running backs this week.
Sanders is one of the guys you can consistently count on to get touches in that Eagles offense. All right, I'll take Robert Woods. He is at the Washington football team. We're giving up the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers. How about you give me that there? And I'm going to say that you were going to sweat him this week. I wanted to say no sweat, but I just couldn't when I was starting to study this thing. The Rams passing game has just been underwhelming so far this year. Only one wide receiver has topped 70 yards against this Washington FT defense. They've only given up 1 touchdown to a wide receiver this year. So as much as I really want good things for Bobby Trees this week, I just don't see them happening. I'm really concerned about what's going to happen with him.
That guy right there, he was the tight end number 1 this week in fantasy football. He just so happens to be my old college teammate and friend back at the University of Iowa. But today for my top 5, I want to give you some names of some tight ends to trust, because we all know how volatile the tight end position can be in fantasy football. But I'm going to give you guys who are not named George Kittle or Travis Kelce. Let's kick it off at the number 5 spot with Jimmy Graham, who's found his sweet spot with the Chicago Bears. Now, he is a red zone target machine, and he's seen the most looks in that sweet spot of the end zone. Graham has seen 5+ targets in 3 of 4 games this season, even after the change of quarterbacks. Now, with Nick Foles as the starter, Jimmy Graham is tied for the 2nd most targets on the team, seeing 12 from the former Super Bowl champion. All right, next up at the number 4 spot, we're counting it down, it's Mark Andrews. Now, Andrews, who's used to catching passes from the reigning MVP Lamar Jackson, he's back at it again, and he has 4 receiving touchdowns this season. Now, he's getting 20% of the target share and has had 20+ fantasy points in 2 out of the last 4 games this season, making him one of the safest starts in the league. All right, number 3, I love this guy, and I've been hyping him all season. It's Dalton Schultz. It's the guy who took over for Blake Jarwin, and he stepped right on up to the plate. With Dak Prescott having to make up for that Cowboys defense, Schultz, along with the Dallas Whiteouts, are getting plenty of opportunities. Schultz has had 17+ fantasy points in 2 out of the last 3 games and 6+ targets in 3 straight. All right, another Iowa Hawkeye teammate and friend of mine. This time, it's number 2, Noah Fant. Now, this guy may be a homer pick because he was my bestie back in college, but he's also a fantastic tight end, so please don't even at me. Now, Noah is averaging almost 14 fantasy points per game, with 2 of his 4 matchups getting him over 17 points. Now, even with the change at quarterback again, he's seen almost 7 targets per game and will continue to be a top pass catcher on that Broncos team. All right, number 1, it is Darren Waller of the Las Vegas Raiders. So I'm going to steal the words right out of Bill Belichick's mouth when he was asked about Waller ahead of their matchup. Belichick said, "It's been a long time since we've seen a guy like this, and he's definitely a lot more than just a receiver playing tight end," and he couldn't be more right about that. Waller's seen 10 targets a game this season, adding up to 29% of the target share. So if you're smart, you want to start Darren Waller each week and look forward to continued tight end 1 numbers. All right, those were my 5 tight ends to trust, not named George Kittle or Travis Kelce.
It's time for some higher or lower with Cynthia Freeland. It's like playing Casino War without the constant humiliation. I give a projection, and Cynthia tells you whether or not the player is going to go higher or lower in their game in Week 5. So we will start off with Joe Burrow there in Cincinnati, going against the Ravens last Sunday. Or going against Ravens this Sunday, I should say. 6 passing touchdowns in the last 3 games. The Ravens allowing 1 or fewer passing touchdowns in 3 of 4 games. So higher or lower than 1 passing touchdown for Joey B this week.
My favorite time of the day is when we get to draw the star on here for when you get the number exactly right. So draw that star. It is 1 passing touchdown. Oh, that is a perfect scar. We're going to have to see if how Rhett feels about that one. I have 239 passing yards, 1 touchdown, and 19 rush yards projected for Burrow this week. Baltimore's defense is not one to target at all. However, Joe Burrow, especially with his kind of diversity of pass catchers here, T. Higgins has shown up well, and Joe Mixon have really showed up well as well. So ultimately for me, this is a pick because Joe Burrow in that volume, he's really starting to become a very nice threat. So this is not a indictment of the Baltimore defense. This is a plus Joe Burrow projection.
He's throwing the ball about 47 times per game. That is volume to the extreme. Next up, Dak Prescott against the Giants, averaging over 422 passing yards per game. The Giants allowing just over 240, so higher or lower than 340 passing yards per game for Dak.
Uh-oh. Go with lower on this one. I know everyone's going to be up in arms. This is a guy who had 450 in 3 straight games, but that's because he had to. In this situation, I don't think they're going to be playing in this kind of back and forth chess match. I have a much lower scoring game overall projected for me in this one. 282 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 21 rush yards. This is a very good projection overall. However, he's only had fewer than 349 passing yards in 1 of 4 games this season. The New York Jets have not allowed such a high passing number all season long. Again, because they're going to keep it on the ground. This is a big Ezekiel Elliott game script for me.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like this is a huge blow-up game potential for Zeke. Speaking of running backs, how about Kareem Hunt? We know Nick Chubb is out for the Cleveland Browns. They're taking on the Indianapolis Colts this week. Higher or lower than 93 rushing yards for Kareem Hunt?
Okay, you said rushing yards, so circle lower on this one. I have 61 rush yards, 3 receptions, 29 yards, and a touchdown projected in this one. It is those small, short passes that is the key in this one. The Indianapolis Colts defense is a stingy defense. However, this game, both sides run the ball a ton, which means there aren't going to be as many possessions, which means there's not going to be as high scoring of game, which means there's not going to be as high score of volume. So for me, this one is all about volume. It is a nice projection. It is just not a huge one because it's not going to be such a high scoring shootout like last week.
All right, we'll go up next for Mike Evans on Thursday Night Football against the Bears. He's had at least 1 receiving touchdown in every game. The Bears, the only team not to allow a touchdown to a wideout, so higher or lower than half a touchdown for Mike Evans.
Higher. You need to amend that to they have not allowed a passing touchdown to a wide receiver yet. This is the first one that they're going to allow. 6 receptions, 74 yards, and a touchdown projected for Mike Evans. He has 5 receiving touchdowns, like you said, most among wide receivers. This is an interesting situation because you want to keep an eye on who's playing, who's healthy, what's going on there. They have a lot of injuries, running back and wide receiver positions. So just keep an eye in general, but that's really no problem in the red zone because you've got this really great red zone receiver in Mike Evans.
Going to go back to that Giants-Cowboys game, talk about Darius Slayton, who the Cowboys have given up a ton to wideouts so far this season. Slayton averaging just 50 yards a game. So let's put it at 76 yards. Higher or lower for D. Slayton?
Woohoo! Higher by 1 yard. I love when that happens. 6 receptions, 77 yards, and a touchdown projected in this one. Dallas has allowed 76 or more receiving yards to 5 wide receivers this season. Slayton projects to be the 6th. Dallas is allowing a ton of yards, 8th most receiving yards per game to wide receivers, 184. They're going to have to throw the ball because I have the game script being that the Giants will be playing from behind. And Slayton is really the target of choice for Daniel Jones. So this is a really nice, sneaky receiver position in a defense that has given up just a bunch of yards to wide receivers.
All right, we'll wrap this one up with Tyler Higbee against the Washington football team. He had 3 touchdowns in week 3, no touchdowns in any other game he's played this season. The football team has allowed the most to tight ends with 5, so higher or lower than half a receiving touchdown for Tyler Higbee.
Man, we're going to end this on a bad note. We're going to look lower in this one. I do not have a touchdown projected for Higbee in this matchup. It's 4 receptions, 39 yards is the projection if you're keeping track at home. This is not an indictment of Higbee. This is a fact that I don't necessarily believe that they're going to need to rely on him. And in this situation, I think it's more of like a Cooper Kupp situation as opposed to necessarily Tyler Higbee. Remember, these are projections. It could totally happen, and he's a good pick still. You should totally play him still. However, it is not an above 50% probability that he has a receiving touchdown in this game.
Hey everybody, it's time for Breaking the Ranks. And this week, I want to let everybody know that I have Aaron Rodgers on my fantasy team. I'm not extremely proud of it, and it's kind of tough. But what's really tough is that he's on a bye this week. So here are 5 guys who you can stream this week. And let's start at number 5. And it will be Minnesota Vikings quarterback Kirk Cousins, which I don't know why I would want to do this to myself. Aaron Rodgers is bad enough. Why would I want to do this with Kirk Cousins? But he does have a great matchup this week against the Seattle Seahawks, who've allowed the most passing yards per game this season. They've allowed 315 passing yards in every game, and Cousins has 4 touchdowns in his last 2 games. Number 4. Ryan Tannehill against the Buffalo Bills. He's had 19 fantasy points in 2 of 3 games this season. The Bills have allowed 20 fantasy points to quarterbacks in 3 consecutive games. The reason being is that Josh Allen is so good that these games sometimes evolve into a shootout. So Ryan Tannehill might be a nice option for you. Number 3. Danny Dimes. We were worried about him coming into the season because that opening quarter of the season was going to be so tough for him, but now the schedule gets a little bit easier. This week, he's got the Dallas Cowboys, who've allowed 12 touchdown passes in the last 3 weeks. They've allowed 36.5 points per game to quarterbacks, which is the most in the NFL. Oh, yeah, and it's a Jason Garrett revenge game. Number 2. Let's go with Justin Herbert. You know, he's averaged close to 20 fantasy points per game this season. That's 10th amongst quarterbacks. He's had 290 passing yards in all 3 games that he's been the starter. And the Saints have allowed 20 fantasy points or more to quarterbacks in every game this season. 1 of 2 teams to do that. And number 1, let's go with Teddy Two Gloves. Yes. He had a great game against the Arizona Cardinals this week, scoring close to 27 fantasy points, and now he's got the Atlanta Falcons. We just saw them last night getting lit up by Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers, so it just makes sense to go with Teddy Bridgewater this week. And those are my 5 quarterbacks that you can stream in place of Aaron Rodgers. Oh, and thanks to the Kevin and Bean Show for passing along this bell.
That leads us to week 5 flex time. We just need some time to ease your mind when it comes to our favorite flex plays this week. So, Kimmy, start us off with yours.
All right, so this week I'm going to put John Brown into my flex. Now, he was back last week against the Raiders after he missed some time with some calf injury, and he did have a modest production, but he's still plenty fantasy relevant, so that's why I'm going to go ahead and put him on into that flex spot. Now, the first place AFC East Bills are facing the Titans, who are giving up almost 40 fantasy points to wide receivers. Now, with Josh Allen thriving in the passing game, like Adam Rink just said, sometimes it becomes a shootout. I expect John Brown to have a big game and hopefully get into the end zone this time and not have it called back with just inches on the yard line.
That's an amazing pick, Kimmy. You know what? I'm going to go with James Robinson, though. I have a team that's excellent, but I have so many tough flex options every week, and I'm leaning towards James Robinson over Will Fuller and CeeDee Lamb this week. He's had 100 scrimmage yards in 3 consecutive games. He is one of just 2 players to have done that this season. The other, Alvin Kamara. Heard of him? And he's got the Houston Texans, which Cynthia said earlier, have given up all the yards, all the points. They've allowed a 100-yard rusher in 3 or 4 games this season, the most rushing yards on the year. I think James Robinson's a pretty safe flex play for me this week.
Now, I promise you, you can flex somebody whose first name doesn't begin with a J, but I'm still going to go with Justin Jefferson in this one. You heard Rank talk about using Kirk Cousins as a streaming option. This is a pretty concentrated passing game. About 75% of the targets have been split between Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. And over the last couple of weeks, 278 receiving yards on 11 catches and a touchdown. He's a downfield threat with about 41% of the air yards. And this is just a reminder, start your wide receivers against the Seattle Seahawks. So far, it's been working out pretty well through the first month of the season. Probably saw that little bit of trickeration by the Browns on Sunday, and Jarvis Landry, being a lefty, usually throws a defense off its game. And that, by the way, that was his first touchdown pass in the NFL. Came complete with a crow hop and everything. And perhaps that touchdown put you over the top to get a win, or your week 4 win could have come from one of these amazing fantasy points that might have gone under the radar.
Flushed out of the pocket, running left to the 30. To the 35, to the 40, cut right 45-50, far side 35-30, close to 50 yards for Kyler Murray.
Runs right by him. Now in trouble, trying to get away from it, throws it downfield, it is caught.
Josh Allen was getting tackled from behind and just flipped this forward like the triple option pass.
Ronald Jones found a little crease to the 50, step arm to the 45 outside the numbers, still on his feet and knocked down to the 30-yard line. And Rojo's got us going.
Throws end zone, it is caught. What a play by T.J. Hawkinson. throws left sideline. Caught by Keenan. What a clutch grab. Captain Clutch comes through again.
So what do you say we make a toast to a fantasy player like some of those we just saw who give us cause to celebrate? So each of us will raise a glass to some fantasy class. So first up, Adam Rank, who are you toasting to on this Tuesday?
I would like to say a word about my good friend Tom Brady. We've gone back a lot of years. I famously picked you to win the Super Bowl 36. Mind you, tabbed you to have a good fantasy season in 2007. That worked out okay. But on Sunday, when the internet was mocking you, saying that perhaps the game had passed you by, you showed everybody why you are the GOAT. 369 passing yards, 5 touchdowns, an interception, 20 fantasy points in 3 out of his last 4 games. So Tom Brady, you are truly the greatest to have ever done it. And to this, I toast you. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Hear, 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 hear. All right, so Kimmy, and then who are you raising a glass to today?
Adam, I really thought you were going to rhyme there, and that was going to be really hard to follow up, but I want to raise a glass and give a toast for Mr. Consistent, and this season for me, it's Adam Thielen. Now, all offseason, we talk and we make assumptions about who's going to be good, who's going to be not, and we were really right about Adam Thielen, so thank you. He's averaging just under 19 fantasy points per game and is a solid wide receiver 1, especially for Kirk Cousins, who's thriving with that Minnesota offense, who likes to stretch the field and go for those deep ball passes. Plus, in the absence of Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen, you have stepped right on up for that offense and right on up for me. Plus, like Adam Rank said, they are going on to play the Seattle Seahawks this week. It's a favorable matchup. So cheers to you, Mr. Consistent, one of the most consistent men in my life.
Cheers to consistency and Adam Thielen. All right, Cynthia, please give us your Tuesday toast.
I would like to raise a glass to Kevin Stefanski for being an advocate of fun, especially letting Odell Beckham Jr. just do literally everything on the field except throw that touchdown. That was for Jarvis Landry. But really, when you look to see what Beckham did, I don't know, just 2 receiving touchdowns, a rushing touchdown. By the way, that run was ridiculous and an incredibly low probability run, which maybe for another receiver would be low probability, but isn't so much low probability for Odell Beckham Jr. This is a situation I think is going to continue from here on out. And by the way, the fun, fun? We like fun? I like fun. Do you like fun? Cheers. Thanks, Kevin Stefanski.
We do. We all enjoy fun here. So cheers to Kevin Stefanski and Odell Beckham Jr. So by the way, I will finish this up by making a toast to George Kittle, who this past week righted all that was wrong in our fantasy tight end world. There was a hole in our lives and in our lineups with George Kittle injured, but he came back and filled that in a huge way. 15 catches, 183 yards, and a touchdown. Just when we needed him most, he appeared and saved our fantasy weeks. And hopefully things continue to prosper and get even better when Jimmy Garoppolo returns. And so I say to you, George Kittle, may your fantasy performances be like lengthy speeches full of useful points. Hear, hear. Cheers to you, George Kittle. All right. So before we go to break, riddle me this. Who is the only player to score 25-plus fantasy points in every week this season? Anybody have a guess? Cynthia, start with you. Actually, just Rank. I'm sorry. Adam Rank.
Russell Wilson.
Okay. That's a guess. Anybody else?
Is that not it? Was I wrong?
Josh Allen, maybe?
All right. Anyway, you guys have
keep
3
drinking.
minutes and 3 minutes and 30 seconds. You can phone a friend. I asked you to be on the honor system. Please do not Google. Here's a hint. Who shows up in this montage, though, as we go to break. It's time to answer our Riddle Me This question. Before the break, we asked, who is the only player to score 25 or more fantasy points every week this season? And the answer is Josh Allen. Props to Kimmy. You had that one before the break. Good on you. Also, Jason here jumped in on the Twitters, and he also had Josh Allen as well, so congrats to you, Jason. you win absolutely nothing. But we do appreciate you participating. So that is pretty great there. Josh Allen's been fantastic all year long. And so for a lot of folks who maybe doubted him, I think it's time to maybe apologize.
Yeah, where are they at?
Folks in Buffalo would certainly appreciate that. In the meantime, we appreciate you watching. That will do it for us on this edition of NFL Fantasy Live. But be sure to join us tomorrow for what to do with receivers like Adam Thielen and Robert Woods in Adam Ranks Starts and Sits. Plus, who can you trust in our Week 5 boom or bust player preview? Fantasy Live, Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you then.